My fiancé cheated with my friend while I paid for our home, so I ended the engagement and left them with nothing they could control. I'm a 29-year-old guy who's always believed that loyalty and consistency are the backbone of a real relationship, and I grew up thinking love was something you protected through hard work and showing up every single day, so when I tell you that I built my entire identity around being the dependable one, I mean that everything from the way I planned my mornings to the way I made decisions revolved around keeping my partner safe, secure, and never questioning where I stood. I still remember the night I met Marissa. Her laugh was soft but confident, the kind of sound that tugged you in without trying, and when she told me, "You feel steady," something inside me relaxed because no one had ever looked at me like I was someone worth relying on, and I let that warmth convince me she was the kind of person who understood me in ways others never had. 2 years later we moved in together, and because I earned more, I naturally took on the rent, utilities, groceries, and most of the day-to-day expenses, telling myself, "It's fine, this is what partners do," even though sometimes I noticed that she didn't hesitate to let those responsibilities stack onto my side of the scale. When she decided to switch careers and said, "I just need some time to figure things out," I didn't question it for a second. I wanted to be the kind of man who supported his partner's dreams, and I took pride in believing that my stability could give her the freedom she needed to start over. But even in those early months, I felt small tremors of something I couldn't name: her growing attachment to my friend Tyler, the way she'd grin at her phone before saying, "It's nothing, just a joke he sent," and the subtle shift in her tone when she talked to him compared to how she talked to me. I ignored all of it, convincing myself that loyalty meant patience, unaware that every time I chose not to question those moments, I was walking closer to the kind of heartbreak that would tear apart everything I thought I understood about love. From the moment we moved in together, I slipped so naturally into the role of provider that I barely noticed how quickly the financial weight stacked entirely on my shoulders, and whenever I covered the rent, utilities, groceries, and the little, surprise expenses that always popped up, I kept telling myself that love wasn't supposed to be transactional, even though a quiet part of me wondered why I was the only one sacrificing. Marissa would brush her fingers over my arm and say, "You're so good to me, you know that," in this soft, almost strategic tone, and even as her words warmed me, I couldn't ignore the way she'd add, "Once my career settles, I'll contribute more, I promise," like a line she'd rehearsed enough times to feel natural even when nothing changed. Meanwhile, our apartment looked more like her vision than mine: new decor, upgraded kitchen tools, random Target bags on the couch, and every time she said, "Can we get this? It'll make the place feel more like home," I'd cave, watching her eyes light up as I swiped my card, trying to convince myself her happiness meant we were building something lasting. But the more I supported her, the more distant she seemed to become. She'd spend hours lying on the couch scrolling on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't let me see, stepping outside to take a quick call, leaving behind this faint citrus perfume trail that made the silence afterward feel heavier than it should have. I'd hear her laugh through the cracked balcony door, this soft, breathy laugh she hadn't used with me in weeks, and when I asked, "Who was that?" she'd just shrug and say, "No one important, just a friend," before disappearing into the bedroom with her phone clutched a little too tightly. Still, I told myself to be understanding, choosing to believe her stress was temporary, not realizing that my silence, my willingness to shoulder everything, was creating the perfect environment for something far more painful to take root. It started small, Tyler dropping by with takeout or saying he was in the neighborhood, but over time his visits became so frequent that I'd walk through the door and hear his voice before I even set my keys down, and every time I saw him lounging on our couch beside Marissa, something in my chest tightened in a way I kept trying to dismiss. She'd look up at me with that too bright smile and say, "Relax, babe, he just came to keep me company while you were working," but the way Tyler would tilt his head and smirk, like he knew something I didn't, made my stomach twist even though I forced myself to pretend everything was normal. They developed these inside jokes, references to memes I'd never seen, songs they apparently shared, stories from nights out I was never told about, and whenever I'd ask, "When did that happen?" Marissa would laugh softly and say, "Oh, you wouldn't care, it was nothing," before exchanging a quick glance with him that felt like a secret passing right in front of me. I'd try to ground myself in the environment, the low hum of the TV, the scent of whatever I'd cooked lingering in the air, the dim glow from the floor lamp, but the atmosphere shifted whenever they were together, like I was the guest in my own home and they were the ones truly comfortable there. One evening, as she stood in the kitchen washing dishes, I heard her say, "Tyler, stop," in this breathless, teasing tone, and when I stepped closer, she turned sharply, eyes wide, and muttered, "He's just being stupid," before grabbing her phone off the counter as if it were some fragile secret that needed to be protected. And even though every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong, I kept swallowing my doubt, telling myself that loyalty meant trusting her, even when the trust one was clinging to felt more like a thread slipping between my fingers, thin and dangerously close to breaking. The night everything shifted was unbelievably ordinary. I came home to the quiet hum of the dishwasher, the faint warmth of leftover pasta on the stove, and Marissa's phone buzzing on the counter with the screen facing up, and for the first time in months she hadn't snatched it the moment I walked in, so when I saw Tyler's name appear with the preview, "I'm still thinking about last night," my entire body went cold as if someone had opened a window into winter. I didn't touch her phone, I didn't even breathe for a second, but the moment the screen lit again with, "You're driving me crazy," I felt something sharp lodge itself in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I whispered, "What the hell is this?" even though I already knew the answer in the sickest, heaviest way possible. I tapped the screen, and the messages unfolded like a trap snapping shut. Weeks of hotel meetups, whispery confessions, pictures she never sent me, and lines like, "I love how you understand me better than he ever will," all written in that casual, intimate tone she used to save for me when our relationship still felt like a place I belonged. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and lemon, but all I could focus on was the way my hands trembled as I scrolled, the floor beneath me feeling unsteady while my brain fought between disbelief and the cruel clarity that I had been financing every moment of their hidden life together. When the front door opened and Marissa called, "Babe? You home?" Her voice sounded distant, muffled, like she was underwater, and I quietly locked the screen, placed the phone exactly where it had been, and forced my own voice to stay steady as I said, "Yeah, I'm here," even though everything inside me was splintering apart. She walked into the kitchen smiling at me like nothing had happened, and as I watched her move around the space I paid for, humming softly while she poured herself a drink, all I could think was that if I confronted her now, the truth would explode too quickly. I needed precision if I was going to survive what I had just discovered. The hours after I found those messages felt like walking on shattered glass, but I forced myself to act normal, sitting beside Marissa on the couch while she leaned into me and rested her head on my shoulder, completely unaware that my mind was replaying every lie she told with a new, brutal clarity that made my skin crawl beneath her touch. I spent the next few days gathering everything, screenshots, bank statements, timestamps, saving them quietly to a hidden folder under the hum of my laptop fan, and whenever she'd wander into the room and ask, "Everything okay?" I'd smile and say, "Yeah, just working," while my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to tear its way out. Tyler became bolder during that time. He'd linger too close to her when I walked into a room, and once when he thought I wasn't within earshot, I heard him murmur, "He has no idea," in this smug, almost amused tone that made my jaw lock so tightly I tasted blood. Meanwhile, Marissa shifted into this strangely affectionate mode, touching my arm more, asking about my schedule, baking me muffins one morning like she was trying to soften the blow of whatever guilt flickered behind her eyes, and each gesture felt like a performance staged in a home that no longer belonged to me. I watched them both carefully, studying the rhythm of their lies, the way her phone always flipped face down when I walked by, the way Tyler would text her and immediately glance up to check my reaction, the way she'd whisper, "You're being paranoid," with just a little too much tension whenever I asked simple questions. But the real confirmation, something deeper and uglier than the messages, was still waiting to surface, and every passing day made it harder to hold my mask in place as I braced myself for the next hit I somehow already sensed was coming. I still remember the exact moment the truth behind their relationship hit a level I never could have imagined. I was walking down the hallway toward our bedroom when I heard Marissa's voice through the cracked door, low and irritated, saying, "Tyler, relax, he's not going anywhere until the down payment is done," and those words sliced straight through me like a blade I never saw coming. I froze, listening as she continued, "Once the house is secured, I'll figure out how to leave without making him suspicious," and Tyler's quiet laugh followed with, "Good, because I'm not waiting forever," a sound so smug and familiar that I felt my entire body go numb as the meaning settled in. This wasn't just cheating, this was a calculated plan to use me until there was nothing left to take. My hand rested on the cool wall as I tried to steady my breathing, the bedroom filling with faint lamplight and the soft rustle of bed sheets as she paced around the room, adding, "He owes me stability after everything I've put up with," and hearing her twist my loyalty into some kind of debt made something inside me break in a way the affair alone never could. I wanted to burst in and scream, but instead I stepped back quietly, my heartbeat throbbing in my ears, and I whispered to myself, "This can't be real," even though the sick weight in my stomach told me it was, down to every word. When she ended the call with a soft, "Love you," her voice warm and gentle in a way she hadn't spoken to me in months, I slipped into the dark living room and sat on the couch, staring at the silent TV while the glow of streetlights leaked through the blinds, painting shaky lines across the floor that felt as unsteady as I did. And in that moment, sitting alone in the home I paid for, listening to the echo of her betrayal still ringing in my head, I realized I wasn't just heartbroken anymore, I was being used, manipulated, and handled like a long-term investment they fully believed would never fight back, and that realization lit a fuse I knew I could never ignore again. A few days after overhearing that call, I reached a point where I couldn't sit inside my own home without feeling the walls closing in, so when Marissa said she was heading to a late yoga class, something in her voice, too light, too polished, pushed me to follow her, and I drove behind her at a distance with my hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to ache. She pulled into a nearly empty parking lot behind a strip mall, stepped out in full makeup and a tight workout outfit she'd never worn to yoga before, and when Tyler's car rolled in seconds later and he got out smiling like they'd planned this 100 times, I watched her walk straight into his arms and kiss him with a familiarity that punched the air out of my lungs. I stayed in my car, hidden behind a row of trash bins, the engine off and the faint smell of gasoline mixing with cold night air, listening to my own shaky breathing as I whispered, "So this is what I am to them," because seeing their bodies pressed together answered every question I'd tried so desperately to avoid. They drove off to a hotel 15 minutes away, and when I saw the glowing sign through my windshield, the same chain Marissa once insisted we couldn't afford for weekend trips, I felt something inside me collapse, not just because of the cheating, but because I had paid for most of her little luxuries while she spent her real affection somewhere else. I sat in that parking lot afterward for almost an hour, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror as my eyes reddened and my jaw trembled, realizing I wasn't just betrayed, I was discarded, replaced, and quietly mocked by the two people I had trusted most. And in that suffocating stillness, with the night pressing in around me and my heart feeling like it had splintered into pieces too small to gather, I finally understood that whatever came next would change everything between us forever. When I finally drove home that night, the apartment felt different, not like a place I lived, but like a stage where I had played the role of the dependable fiancé while the real script unfolded behind my back, and as I walked through the dimly lit hallway, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint smell of Marissa's vanilla candles made my stomach twist with a mix of grief and growing resolve. I sat at the dining table and opened my laptop, the screen glow reflecting off my shaking hands as I whispered, "No more," and I began changing passwords, locking accounts, rerouting paychecks, and taking screenshots of every financial record that proved I had been the sole provider while she built a secret life funded by my stability. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer whose office smelled faintly of old books and coffee, and when I laid everything out, texts, call logs, bank statements, he leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said, "You need to protect yourself immediately," advice that both steadied me and broke my heart because it confirmed how deeply I'd been exploited. Back at home, Marissa floated around the apartment with this strange, forced cheerfulness, asking, "Are you okay? You seem distracted," while her eyes flicked constantly to her phone, and every time it vibrated, she'd angle the screen away from me, unaware that I was no longer trying to win her trust, I was preparing to cut her off completely. I quietly contacted my landlord, arranged a lease termination, and lined up temporary housing with a friend who didn't ask questions when I said, "I just need a place for a while," because my voice must have carried that hollow kind of exhaustion only betrayal can carve out. And as I packed a few essentials into a small duffel bag and slid it under the bed where she wouldn't notice, a cold, steady calm settled over me, the kind that comes not from healing, but from knowing the moment of truth is coming, and nothing will ever be the same after it arrives. 2 days after I followed them to the hotel, I finally reached a point where pretending felt more exhausting than the truth itself, so when Marissa came home humming softly with a takeout bag swinging from her hand, I stood in the living room with her phone screenshots pulled up on my laptop, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own voice when I said, "We need to talk." She froze, her smile collapsing as she asked, "Why do you look like that?" But when I turned the screen toward her and said, "Explain this," the room fell dead silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of traffic outside, and I watched her face drain of color as the magnitude of what I knew settled between us like a physical weight. At first she tried denial, whispering, "These are out of context," then when I pulled up the hotel confirmations she snapped, "Fine, I made mistakes, but you drove me to it," her voice cracking as if shifting blame could rewrite the months of deceit she had built with Tyler behind my back. I told her calmly, almost too calmly, that she had 48 hours to move out since the lease and every bill were in my name, and her voice broke into a desperate, trembling plea, "You can't just abandon me like this," but the irony of that statement hit so hard I almost laughed because she had abandoned me long before I ever found proof. As tears slid down her cheeks and she muttered, "I didn't think you'd find out," I stepped back, noticing how the soft light from the lamp carved shadows across her face and made the entire scene feel unreal, like I was watching someone else's life crumble instead of my own. And just as she sank onto the couch, gripping her hair and whispering, "Please don't do this," my phone lit up with Tyler calling repeatedly, his name flashing like a warning, making me realize that whatever came next wouldn't just be about her, it would be about him too, and neither of them was ready for the consequences. The morning after the confrontation, I sent an anonymous email to Tyler's girlfriend containing every screenshot, hotel confirmation, and timestamp, and within an hour she replied with a single line, "Thank you for showing me the truth," which hit harder than expected as I sat in the dim kitchen with cold coffee, listening to Marissa pace around the apartment like a trapped animal whispering, "He won't leave me alone unless you talk to him." By noon, Tyler was blowing up my phone with message after message, "You ruined everything, she left me, you're pathetic," but I just stared at the screen in silence, feeling almost detached as the vibration rattled against the wooden table, because for the first time in months, their chaos wasn't mine to absorb or fix. Marissa tried switching tactics, her voice trembling as she said, "I didn't mean for things to go this far," then shifting into anger with, "You blindsided me," as if exposing her affair was a betrayal bigger than the months she spent lying to my face while using my home and money to build a fantasy life with someone else. She followed me from room to room, crying hard enough that mascara streaked her cheeks, whispering, "Please, just give me a chance to explain," but the only thing I felt was a numb kind of exhaustion, the kind that settles in your bones when you finally accept that someone you loved wasn't just careless, they were deliberate. Meanwhile, Tyler's world was unraveling, his girlfriend posted a public breakup statement, his friends started distancing themselves, and someone in our friend group sent me a screenshot of him screaming in a group chat that I sabotaged his future, which would have been funny if it didn't underline how deeply he believed I was meant to be the fool in their story. And as I watched everything they'd built together crumble in real time, I realized with a sharp, quiet certainty that neither of them understood yet that this was only the beginning of losing the control they thought they had over my life. 2 days before her move-out deadline, I finalized everything with my landlord, signing the lease termination in an office that smelled faintly of dust and printer ink, and as I handed back the keys, I felt something loosen in my chest, a small breath of freedom after months of suffocating under lies I hadn't even known were there. Back at the apartment, Marissa was surrounded by half-packed boxes, her voice shaky as she said, "We can fix this if you just slow down," but when I replied, "There's nothing left to fix," she stared at me like the words physically struck her, and the dim afternoon light filtering through the blinds made her look like a stranger standing in a place she'd only borrowed. I transferred every utility, subscription, and bill back into my name, watching as her access disappeared piece by piece. No more shared accounts, no more payments tied to my card, no more quiet ways she could drain me, while she pleaded, "Please don't do this, I have nowhere else," revealing just how deeply she'd relied on my stability even as she planned to leave me. Tyler, on the other hand, kept sending angry voicemails, his voice cracking between rage and panic as he shouted, "You can't just cut her off," as though he had forgotten that he was the one who encouraged her to drain me dry until the house was secured, and hearing him fall apart only confirmed how entitled he felt to everything that was mine. When the movers finally carried out her last box, the apartment felt strangely hollow, the air quieter and cooler without her perfume lingering, and as she stood in the doorway one last time whispering, "I didn't think you'd ever leave me," I realized that was exactly the problem. She never believed I had the strength to walk away. And when the door shut behind her with a soft, final click, I understood with absolute clarity that I had taken back the one thing neither she nor Tyler ever expected me to reclaim: control over my own life. The first night in my new place felt surreal. I lay on a mattress on the floor with barely any furniture, the room smelling of fresh paint and cold evening air, and for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt like space I finally owned, a quiet that belonged entirely to me. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding piece by piece, waking up early for work, reconnecting with old friends who said things like, "We missed you," and realizing how much of myself I'd allowed to disappear while carrying the emotional and financial weight of someone who never saw me as a partner, only as a stepping stone. Marissa tried emailing once, writing, "I hope you're healing and maybe someday we can talk," but I archived it without replying, breathing in the grounding scent of morning coffee and the sound of birds outside my window as I reminded myself that healing didn't require revisiting the person who broke me to begin with. Tyler eventually stopped calling too, though before he disappeared entirely he sent one last bitter message, "You ruined everything," and I stared at it for a moment before deleting it, understanding now that people like him never take responsibility, they just look for someone to blame when their manipulations implode. One evening, as I stood on my small balcony watching cars pass under the streetlights, I realized that the freedom I felt wasn't about revenge or punishment, it was about reclaiming the time, energy, and self-worth I had given to someone who treated them like disposable currency. And in that quiet moment, with the cool night breeze brushing against my skin, I finally understood that walking away hadn't just saved me, it rebuilt me, piece by painful piece, into someone stronger than the man they believed would never stop giving.